any longer. In fact, I do my very best to disassociate from the whole thing.
Yeah.
But of course, there's always people interested in those work. I feel an obligation to society, to the world, to try to correct the damage that was done during this project. You know, some of the outgrowth later on from Montauk project was physical medications like Prozac and Ritalin and other drugs that they use for mind control purposes that they now give to the public, but they mask it with other explanations.
That's right. We had Dr. Anna Blake Tracy on this program to actually talk about this, and the same company, I think, Savos, if I remember correctly, that actually developed LSD, was one of the companies who first developed these happy pills, as they call it. So.
Yes. Well, you know that LSD, the U.S. government purchased from the laboratories in Switzerland a long time ago. They purchased 250,000 doses, which they then tested on military people and even CIA agents, some of whom committed suicide from it.
Sheesh, my God.
And the government of the United States also brought to North America many of the Nazi scientists who, in the concentration camps, would experiment on people to see the limits of what a human being can take, and they incorporated that information into the Montauk experiments, and only adding to it with modern equipment.
There we go. During your time at Montauk, when these experiments were happening, were you at this time a prisoner here, or did you live a quote normal life on the outside, so to speak, also?
I'm sorry, I have to laugh because I never had normal life ever. I just never was like anybody else. It's interesting because, you know, when they would take me to this location, it was like having another life within a life. And then when I was brought home, I was so fearful of the world because of my experiences, I very rarely left the house. In fact, I was afraid to go to school. I didn't have friends. I was basically cloistered, you know, into my home, and I was afraid of the world. I was afraid of people. So it was never normal life that I had.
Yeah. So, okay, there are several ways we can go from here. I would love to hear more about, of course, the hyperspace plane or level that you talked about, but I'm also curious, maybe before we go there, to talk a little bit about what actually happened in 1983 that you mentioned that caused the project to collapse or crash.
Yes, that's a very famous story, which people read the Montauk series of books, they can see this. By the way, my book, Alien Connection, was simply my remembrance and interpretation of what happened at Montauk Project. My book in Montauk series is the only one written by me, so the audience should realize the other books were written by other people. And what happened was they had what was called the Montauk chair. This chair was set up so that the psychics would sit on this chair and their minds and bodies would be hooked in electronically and energetically to a computer system, which could then step up the thoughts that this person would generate and actually physically create it. This technology came from Sirius A. It was not human technology. We, in the United States and the Soviet Union, both had technologies that came from other planets. And so one of the psychics, who was the lead psychic at the program, was on this chair, and he was usually monitored all of the time. But for some reason on this day, he was not carefully monitored. The equipment was on. He had a nightmare about some monster that was in his mind, and the computer generated it. And literally, this creature, this energetic creature, tore up the base. It started to destroy equipment. It was destroying buildings. They could not turn it off, so they had to actually, with an axes and weapons, they actually destroyed all of the equipment to shut it down.
Really?
And it took weeks for this energetic creation, which they called Junior, to basically dissipate. The energy remained frozen in a particular spot on the base, and you can see it. You could have seen it at the time. And then over the weeks and days, it started to fade until finally it vanished. But then the project was finished. And all of us who were part of it basically were instantaneously cut loose, although not in a proper way. Many of the survivors became alcoholics, drug addicts, some wound up in prison, mental institution. Years later, I found out that there was a medical clinic just outside of Reno, Nevada, high up in the mountains, where many of these people wound up and are there to this day under government supervision. And years I met a man who was the courier between Washington, D.C. and both Montauk and this clinic in Nevada and other places, and he told me about this location.
So, okay, this is absolutely fascinating. This share that you mentioned, do you know anything how this technology actually worked, and what was the function here? How did this happen?
Well, the technology, again, came from Sirius A. It was not human technology. So the problem was that the machines were calibrated for the mind pattern and brain waves of those beings. And for a human being, my opinion was it was a little bit too strong. It was like a step-up transformer of the thought waves. So that your thought waves would pass through this device. They would be then downloaded and amplified and go through a process of degradation so that whatever you thought became physical, the density started to accumulate molecular structure around the thought pattern. Very much like DNA is formed from your thought pattern, this device, whatever you would think of it, would create in physical reality. My opinion also is that the Syrians used this to create equipment, to create a device, whatever they needed at the moment. I don't think it really should have been used for human beings who are not so careful about the way they think.
Well, we have to return later because there's so much to talk about here, and this opens up so many fields. We have to return later to talk more about of course, who the Syrians are and where they come from and why they're here and all of that, of course. But I want to ask you, did you ever sit in this chair?
I was what they called a booster. My job very often was to energetically, mentally boost the psychic in the chair. I personally did not sit in the chair, but my energy was used to boost the person in the chair. So I was hooked up to it, but not on it.
I see. And one of these that actually came out from here, you mentioned Junior. How did they get rid of that?
Well, it basically dissipated on its own over time. And in one of the Montauk books, and I think it might have been the first or second book, there's a picture of the location where Junior was. And you can possibly see an outline of it still to this day in this location. But interestingly, the government has knocked down most of the buildings on the base now, and they have redesigned it and made it into a public park for people to go. And but they left the radar tower chained off with very high fence around it. And there are also areas on this new park with the signs that tell people not to go in this location. And I just recently did a television show on Montauk Project on the base, which was broadcast this past July. And it's a very fascinating location now, and it's so strange because it's open to the public, yet there's so many danger signs that I can't imagine why anyone would go there.
Okay, so it's not recommended to head on over there to check it out, I guess, then?
I would not go alone, anyway.
Okay.
It's still very heavy energy. In fact, After I went to do this TV show, I was sick for 1 month after.
Really?
And I never, ever get sick.
So this is something that kind of sticks to the place, the atmosphere of the place. It's still there in a way?
Well, I do know that the base is still there under the ground. However, it's not used in the same way as it was. I know now that it is used for weapons and weather manipulation.
Okay. I did read that a prototype of this chair was duplicated and actually was given to Britain and put in a facility on the River Thames. Do you know if that is true or not?
Well, I know that Britain had its own version in Tavistock, which was located in London. And I know also that the Soviet Union had their own version of Montauk. They used the Filotov Institute in Odessa, which is now part of Ukraine. But yes, Britain had their own version of it. Tavistock still exists to this day and still does mind control experimentation in Britain. So yes, it's very likely that they have a version of this there.
Okay, so beyond, materializing, as the person that you described here had some kind of nightmare, basically, beyond materializing this, what was the kind of the use for it? I mean, you could, obviously there's an advantage with materializing objects or stuff that you need and so forth, but in a more practical context to the application of manipulating population and mind controlling population, how would this technology apply to that?
The best way to control a population is through fear. When a person is afraid, they are open to any suggestion that they think will save them. And so what they did in Montauk, a lot of the equipment would actually download the emotional output of the people involved in the experiment and store that information, and then was able to amplify it and transmit it over large areas, especially via satellite. And when they would transmit this emotion of fear or the mind pattern of fear into population, then it opened up the crown chakra and pineal glands so that the download of transmitted mind control could be established. So that was the ultimate purpose of these experimentations, and for the creation of fear, emotions of various types. They also knew during ritual, and they did a lot of sexual ritual in this location, that at the moment of death, when a person is extremely fearful, a chemical is produced at the pineal gland, which then can be extracted at death and used as a narcotic.
Adrenochrome?
Adrenalinochrome, yes.
Oh, really? Sheesh. Okay. And that is... I actually heard about adrenochrome, I think, first time mentioned in the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, basically. But in that movie, at least, they used it for a very powerful drug, basically.
Yes.
What is the reason for this, for the people that are, that want to develop this? Do they get high on this? What's the purpose?
Yes, this is true. This is a very expensive and much sought after narcotic among the elite or Illuminati of this planet. In fact, there was another movie made about this years later called We Come in Peace with Dolph Lundgren, if you remember, where he was an alien who comes to Earth to kill people and extract us from their pineal gland.
Really? I got to take a look at that one. Give us the title again. It
was called We Come in Peace.
We Come in Peace. Okay, all right. Excellent.
And this was quite the opposite.
Exactly. So, again, going back to the people that are involved with this then here, you mentioned through paperclip, Nazi scientists, but also in cahoots with Russian scientists.
Yes.
Was this